Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar as we'll be discussing Forrester's 2022 Digital Process Automation Survey results. Before we get started, I would like to take care of some housekeeping and offer a few tips for viewing today's webinar. Please note that the webinar is being recorded today, but if you do have any trouble logging into audio or any issues during the webinar, you can email info@flowforma.com for assistance. Throughout the webinar, your lines will be muted, but you can use the Q&A function on your right-hand side to ask any questions, which we will answer at the end. After the webinar, we will send you a copy of the recording, and we would appreciate it if you could complete our short feedback form at the end. So, now I would love to introduce our speakers for the day. My name is Ursula Cullen. I'm the Digital Marketing Executive at Flowforma, and I am joined by Rob and Shay. Rob, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester, is one of the most respected advisors in the IT industry. His experience and insights are trusted by many and some of the most successful organizations worldwide. Rob's research focuses on digital process automation, as well as artificial intelligence and cognitive computing. Rob, we're delighted to have you today. Shay is Head of Solutions at Flowforma. Shay is a highly skilled professional in the IT industry, and he has significant experience in providing clients with analysis, design, and implementation of business development solutions, particularly the no-code Flowforma process automation tool. He works with multiple clients across the globe, and he's worked closely with Flowforma customers to streamline and automate their business processes. Guys, I'd like to welcome you both today and thank you for joining me. And Rob, I think we'll jump straight in with your first slide, and if you could kick off, that would be great.
Thank you, Ursula, and thanks everybody for joining today. This is always an interesting time of year for us as we go through the results of this survey that's been going on for quite a number of years. We've been at this survey now. This is the 6th iteration that we've done of this survey, and it's interesting. It's really been, I think, in many ways, maybe the most gratifying version of this survey, because a lot of the things that we've been predicting, a lot of the things that we've been expecting, have really come to bear in this latest version of the survey. We really have reached this really critical period with automation, which we're referring to as the automation imperative. And the data is very interesting in backing it up. What do we mean, first off, by process automation? And what we're really referring to is automation referring to business models with technology that are at the core, right? We are really technology focused. We're automation first. We're automating things where and when we can. One of my colleagues refers to this as software being an expression of the business. I love that term. And for it to be an expression of the business, one of the things that we really have to concentrate on as we look at the data and we look at where this is moving is software development closer to the business, making it less of the ivory tower IT thing and something that everybody has available to them, be able to drive the business and drive process and have this become part of everybody's job. And we've been through some things lately that have really driven this, rather dramatically, and we'll talk about a couple of the things that have been primary drivers of automation here recently. So I always like to start with a personal gripe of mine, because we all look at automation and it's everywhere. It's part of our everyday lives, something we can always relate to. So over the course of the last couple of years, I have had to get a number of vaccinations, as many of us have. And if you think about one of the areas that was really wildly disrupted by COVID, one of them was healthcare. We had a healthcare system, particularly here in the U.S. So sorry for the U.S.-based example here, but everything was paper-based. You went to the pharmacy, you filled out paperwork, you hoped that you could find something in your phone where you had your numbers for your healthcare insurance and your doctor's phone number and all these different things that you weren't used to carrying around. During COVID, we weren't going to be passing paper around anymore. So the first thing this happened at the pharmacy was we went to these online forms, and boy, that was a big improvement. We were very happy about that. Here, what's wrong? So I fill out a form. I'm really happy. because now I can now I don't have to fill out the paperwork. I have to sit on my floor with a clipboard. And this is the form that I was presented with. And you'll notice two things about this form. It asks me for a whole bunch of information, and then it asks me to upload pictures of my card, my little medical insurance card there at the bottom. So I upload the pictures of my medical insurance card, and then I still have to fill out the information up top. So there's no content intelligence that could have actually scraped that information out. I have no idea though why they wanted a picture of my card. Here's where it gets even more annoying. The next time I went back, I had to fill the same form out again. So we're at this sort of partial automation form. I like it better than the clipboards, but as a consumer, as someone who's using this, it's still a frustrating experience. So let's jump to the next slide, Ursula. And what's happening here then is, as you move in, and let's go ahead and build this out, is we have to think about this in terms of we don't know what's coming next. We need to really think about a future-proof automation strategy. So what's happening that could affect how we think about automation and process optimization? Well, first off, during one of these surveys, which was very specific in 2020, we asked the question very overtly, did your processes break during COVID when you were no longer co-located, you had remote work, shelter in place, there was nobody in the mail room, you couldn't pass file folders or clipboards around? 66% of organizations reported broken processes. So what's happening next? Is it the supply chain? Is it geopolitical? Is it environmental? I live in California. We have huge disruptions when there's fires. You know, there are huge problems with flooding in certain areas. I don't know what environmental impacts can have on my business. Is it just the speed of business? Is it the opportunity or threat? Is your competitor just so much better at doing something that it starts to impact your business? If you're in the insurance business, you're onboarding customers. Is your competitor able to do it in 3 minutes on a mobile device, and you still have people sitting down with agents or filling out lengthy paperwork? All we know is that agility and adaptability is far more important now than it ever has been before. So, you know, with that in mind, most of your automation strategy is based on point solutions, and a lot of these point solutions are breaking, and most of them failed during COVID, and so that's particularly problematic. So when we ask folks in this thing, we've always been looking at this very carefully and said, you know, is process automation strategic or is it tactical? This tends to be something that's been tactical. Those who've been around, bumping around kind of the BPM space here for 20 years, we've always been focused on, you know, can I lower costs? Can I lower error rates? Can I have these things move a little bit faster so the less few people are touching them? They've not tended to be strategic objectives. Now, and by the way, if we looked at this survey over the course of a number of years, it was always 2 years out. 2 years out, we're going to be really focused on business transformation. 2 years out, we're going to really be looking at improving customer experience. That's one of these things that really strongly came into focus in this year's survey. 77% of organizations responding to the survey say that the primary focus of their business process optimization efforts were around either accelerating business transformation or improving customer experience. Why is this so important? It's important because it's coming from the top down. These are initiatives that are coming from the C-level or sometimes from the boardroom down. And it means that a lot of the process automation efforts that you take, which could be extensive, they could cross legacy systems, they could cross organizational boundaries. These have always been sticky points for process automation. These things get a lot less sticky when it's a strategic objective and the CEO is saying 80% of our new onboarding of our new service has to be done straight through processing on a mobile device, or there will be no more touching of paper as we bring a patient through a process of seeing a doctor. These things become strategic objectives, and it doesn't mean that cost reduction isn't critically important. It really is. If we go to the next slide, you know, what we quickly discover is cost reduction is not the primary driver. I'm not contradicting myself. It feels like I am. But on the last slide, you saw that these strategic objectives, if you looked at the ghosted things, way down the list was cost reduction. It's not the primary objective, but 75%, as we asked about this discreetly, say it's still important. and 17% say it's important in the future. What does it mean? It means cost reduction is expected. We're going to get cost reduction out of these initiatives. And what makes that really interesting, I think, particularly in today's environment where we're a little less certain about what the economics of the future may hold, these things are self-funding. We take out costs while we are advancing our strategic objectives. The other piece that kind of falls by the wayside a little bit on the next slide is our employees, right? So, we talk about customers, we talk about patients, we talk about citizens if you're in a government organization. But what also is extremely important is employees. So employee satisfaction, what is the employee experience of working with these tools? 59% say it's important now, and 37% say it becomes increasingly important in the future. So, so these things remain important. We understand that there is high turnover rates with employees. We're in this kind of new economy where people move around much more aggressively than they did, and taking care of employees and making sure that they stay satisfied throughout the process remains very, very important, even as we're looking at those primary strategic objectives, which tend to be more externally facing, or often very much externally facing. So let's continue on and talk about why this is so important, and why optimization and being able to democratize these initiatives is so important. And we talk about automation and say, look, it is a fool's errand if you think about automation without optimization, without looking at your processes and understanding, are these good processes? Are these well-run processes? Well, who understands that? Your employees understand that, right? Your customers, your patients, your citizens that you serve, they understand these things, and we need to have them very, very close. And that's traditionally not how we do things. But on the next slide, I want to just take a step back and just look at what a process looks like, because again, we've kind of gotten away from this idea that we're going to take a little cost out and that's victory, right? I'm in the sales department. I'm going to take a little bit of cost of my sales cycle out. I'm going to do some document generation. I'm going to do some, some content intelligence. I'm going to streamline the approval process of a contract. These are all great things, but they may not move the customer experience dramatically, because marketing is working in it in one way, and you've got production that's working in it another way, and delivery and support and what's happening after the sales, and all these things are interacting with finance. So I've taken some cost and some complexity out of sales. My friends over in production are taking some cost and complexity out of that. But if we build out the slide, what's happening for the people that are actually looking at this is you don't have a single product owner, you don't have a single process owner that says, these all touch the end customer. My processes have become increasingly sophisticated. And as my processes have become increasingly sophisticated, I haven't been able to coordinate all these parts of my organization. That is why that first slide, where we say it's about digital transformation, it's about employee satisfaction, is incredibly important. And just how important is it? Well, let's take a look at the next slide and see what exactly are you all up against in doing this. And you're up against two huge barriers in terms of driving this more automated approach to business. The first is the goal, right? So the goal is I have over 70% of my organization that is attempting to drive some degree of straight-through processing in my organization, 83%. We plan to automate large numbers of currently manual processes. We plan to reinvent and reimagine existing processes. We plan to completely transform end-to-end process. These things look different. They are different, but they all map back to one thing. They map back to straight-through processing. They map back to all of the paper, all of the spreadsheets need to be gone. But if we look at the next slide, what we very quickly discover is there is a mountain of paper and a mountain of spreadsheets that you're all sitting on. Well, okay, fair enough. What have we given our employees in order to automate and make their business better? We're doing a big BPM project. We're putting in a big packaged application. You're going to love it, right? Well, it does about 80% of what I need, and it's up to me to automate the rest of it. And what am I doing to do that? I'm using electronic manual routing. I'm using Excel and I'm using email. How many of my processes are running? Well, 43% of the organizations have many of their processes running in spreadsheets and email, and 19% have most of them. That is a lot of things that need to be picked off and driven into managed platforms and into something that can actually participate in a straight through process end to end. And then we have our old friend paper. There's still 45% of organizations that have a few things that are running in paper. I need to automate those things. I need to get them out of my organization. At least as unsatisfying as my signing up for my vaccine process was, it's in a managed platform. It's in a form that could actually be accessed and automated more extensively later. In paper, even if it's just a few of your processes, but they're sitting in the middle of a large end-to-end process, that process that was inefficient, when you can't handle the paper, like what happened to us with shelter in place, it's no longer inefficient, it's broken, it's completely broken. So if we look at the next slide, we have to start moving this out to the people that know it best, which are our employees. These are our business people. And the first rule of process optimization is don't pave cow paths. This is the cow's face. He looked, the cow, the steer, I guess it is here. He was fine until I couldn't get the slides to advance. Then he had this look on his face, but he's also concerned about process optimization. So if we move forward and start to think about this, how did we do it before? We had a handful of really expensive IT people and a handful of really expensive Six Sigmas, and they told us how process optimization could work, and they did it for us, and they did fine, right? I'm not trying to knock the great work that was done by those folks, but they're not going to get to that 83% of straight through processing. They're not there to address that mountain of Excel and paper that also needs to be automated. And let's not forget, some organizations have massive IT backlogs, so you may not even be able to talk to these folks. So what's happening? We're moving to a model in which citizens are becoming citizens, your business people, our term, a term we can use for citizens. They're becoming increasingly involved in the automation process, and this is really important. So, there's three phases that we see, and one is this kind of project by project approach, and this is kind of the democratization of what was once BPM, the beginnings of what we would call digital process automation. I've got a few projects. I'm working on those. I tend to do it through centrally located people, but I'm working extensively with the business. I'm bringing them into the process, but it's still not particularly scalable. When we did the research on this particular project, which we refer to as the Citizen Process Expert Research, we find that most folks are in this COE model, this Center of Excellence model. We want to have a continuous flow of experts, and we want to make our expertise, our Six Sigmas, our IT resources available to you. Do this faster. We want to do it faster. We want to be more efficient at it. But now we're moving to this model with the citizen developer, with the citizen process expert. We're moving into this fully federated model where everybody in the organization potentially plays a role in driving process optimization and potentially has a hand in the automation. What does that mean? Does it mean that everybody in your organization is going to become a developer? Maybe. I'll tell you, there are a lot more organizations that are taking that path that we talk to at Forrester now than there were 2 years ago. But at a minimum, even if you're just moving towards that model, your business people that are on the front lines, your business people that understand the processes and can help optimize are working more actively, more iteratively, because the tools like Flowformer's tools allow them to do it. They allow for rapid prototyping. They allow for rapid iteration. So how important is this? If we look at the next slide, the answer is it's really important, right? And this is another one where we've been waiting for this dial to move, and then just saw this massive dramatic move in the latest version of this survey. So the question here is are individual employees, not specialists, not IT, not Six Sigmas, in your organization expected to lead or execute process optimization? Whopping 80% say yes. This is not how the world was just a few years ago. This is a dial that's being moved by, well, part of it is by need. Part of it is by fear of what's going to happen next that I can't adapt to quickly enough. And part of it is low code and no code tools that make this possible, that allow us to bring these people closer into the process. And probably the third driver of this is a desire. We have more and more employees, more and more people in our organization that want to be a part of it. They expect to be a part of it. So let's pop down to the next slide and just talk about the technology for a minute. It's complex and it's confusing. So if we build this out and go into the next slide, let's look at a process, right? So what does a process have? Increasingly, we want to interact through chat. Increasingly, we want to use tools like low code because they can allow us to develop much more quickly. We want a platform that can allow us to easily consume content intelligence. I was frustrated because I had to put that, I took a picture of my insurance card and then I had to re-enter the information that was in the picture. Content intelligence can do that for me. It can make for a better experience. We have conditional logic and rules. We don't always do things in a model, or I certainly shouldn't be doing them through code. How does a process move forward? Sometimes it requires rules and decisioning. We may want to integrate RPA to remove wait states. There might be things that are task-oriented, and there might be things that are where I don't have an API. I can't get to the back-end information. RPA is the only way. And we may want to move into things like artificial intelligence, very, very specifically targeted to handle certain types of activities. But if we build this out, okay, so this is kind of the conversation. We've been moving from BPM to digital process automation to intelligent automation. If we click forward, these are not the last things that are coming on. Let's go ahead and click this out. We've got event-driven architectures. There's things that are happening in the organization that I don't know about, but if the process becomes aware of them, then we might change the process. We've got microservices. We might use external things for externalizing processes. When I ask for a contract to be sent out, I'm going to do that through SharePoint, or I'm going to do that through Box. How do I know when that comes back in? And then across the bottom, we build it out one more piece. We look at that piece that is so critical that that comes in through offerings like Flowforma, low code and no code offerings in the market, which is this orchestration piece, which is the last click that we have here. Orchestration, monitoring, managing things against the unknown, heterogeneous technologies, human states. This is hard to do. This is something that our good old friends in process automation have been doing for a long time. And finally, we understand the extraordinary value that they've been adding here, being able to pull together all of these disparate technologies in human states. So let me go ahead and finish out here and just talk about what do you do next? And the first thing I would say is approach this strategically, right? Process automation is not a little point solution project that you're working on anymore. You have to think about it in terms of the entirety of the organization and how your business strategy is aided by this. And probably the first thing is to identify the scope and objectives of your process optimization. How much is out there? How much paper am I trying to replace? How much Excel? How many processes do we need to do this against? And if the answer is dozens, hundreds, you probably have to rethink your approach. It's probably not going to happen in the old-fashioned way. And then start to align this with your strategic goals. If you have strategic goals that say we're moving towards a digital business, and anybody who had digital business transformation initiatives, that's it, guys. We're a lot of those, but those strategic business goals sometimes are very challenged because we didn't necessarily have the tools ready yet. If we move on in this process, who's doing it very unambiguous and brought along, and have everybody in your organization is going to be a no-code developer, but it might. And what it also might mean is that they're working very closely with the developers to make sure that the process goes extremely quickly and efficiently, and that you have the agility to do this. And then the last piece is, I think we can now start to think about standardization of these solutions. Low code, no code solutions, they've kind of grown holistically. They've been a bit viral. And that's good, right? Those were great proving grounds. But increasingly, you have to think about, I want to do this at scale across the entirety of my organization. I need to make a big bet on a vendor that does this very, very well so that I can do it consistently. So thank you again. Apologies for my little, my little issue with advancing the slides, but I'm going to pass you over to Shay now, and Shay will talk about how this works in the formal world specifically.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much. Always love seeing the stats there. Love to see the fruits of people's work, that's for sure. Yeah, so Rob is talking about all of the stats from analysis that the guys have been doing for quite a while. What I wanted to do is actually inform you of some of the stories of some of the customers. So just to give you some real life examples of what's going on around us and what we have seen from organizations who are digitizing. The big thing for everybody, and it's funny that Rob was talking about, strategy versus tactical. So people approach these initiatives in different ways. Flowforma is a tool that permits you to do it that way, whether you want to have it as tactical and or strategic. You get all the tools in one place. The reality is you don't have to program any of your processes. So the nice thing is, again, to use the coined phrase of citizen developer, your developers are now your business people. So it's a knowledge transfer. So your people in your organization are literally telling you what they do, what they're putting all that information into a system that will create digital forms to reflect that. We had one customer here, Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, really exciting customer, I gotta tell you, because they came to us, and you would think it's kind of it started off as a tactical scenario, because they had a specific process that they needed to fulfill, and that was, well, the name of the organization, Tropical Medicine, was a travel permit, because they had to go to a lot of environments, countries, and different locales where requirements were completely different, be they inoculations, visas, money, travel restrictions, all that sort of thing. So it was quite a complex process, but really crucial, and hit the nail on the head. They got a number of people, they realized when they saw that they could create this process themselves, they decided, we're going to get 8 people trained up, which they did, and decided to kick on processing, creating processes by department. We went back to them a few months later, and they already had 40 processes created within a few months. And now, a year and a half later, they have over 120 processes. Now, Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine only has an IT infrastructure environment, and they don't have programmers. So they have people who definitely maintain systems, who manage systems for sure. But it was the business people who took control of the processes themselves. They did have C-level support. So it was the first process that had that impact, because it had an impact throughout the organization. So many people were traveling to do their job, and the process, in inverted commas, so it was a manual, and it was back down to the Excel and spreadsheet scenario as Rob was talking about. That was a very manual and not too visible of a process. Once that was proven to yield results, what it meant was departments kept coming in saying, I want to do that. I want to do that. Can I get more efficient here? And the guys just started creating processes, getting it through the system and going live. The adoption was so fast because of the initial proof point. Internally, the satisfaction from a job point of view went through the roof. Now, that's just Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. As I say, they came with one issue and ended up creating 120 processes themselves. One of our other clients Sullivan Engineering. Now, this was a very similar scenario where they had one example of a process that was driving them mad. So these field inspection reports the guys were doing now, Sullivan Engineering are actually based in New York and Boston. And as you can imagine, you've got environments here, people on different sites, and they wanted to have a level of consistency. So there was a drive from, again, here we've got C-level support. There was a drive from the CEO that they wanted, and in this case, actually the CEO was actually the owner as well. They wanted to have a consistency, a professional consistency across the organization. So no matter what site you're working on, what city you're in, you are always going to get the same professional output from Sullivan Engineering. So how are they going to achieve this? One of the guys involved, a guy called Jimmy Monaghan, came to us and went through the scenario. We gave him examples of what processes might look like, brought it back to the people in charge. And again, everybody's focusing on one process here. They're all focusing on the inspection reports. And then they decided to give that a go. As with Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, as soon as the success came from that, all of the other processes were requested. I mean, you can see an example of them, of some of them here: leak investigations, etc., COVID checklists. All of these things were, if you were to try and get externals to take care of this, you're talking about programming, you're talking about the turnaround times being long. The guys took care of it themselves. One person is actually manages all of the live, everything going to live. And again, we have this knowledge transfer. But what Sullivan ended up with was exactly what the owner had wanted: consistency across the board, consistency in reporting, consistency in data being gathered. And the data being gathered is a funny thing because, again, as Rob was saying earlier on during this presentation, people's reaction sometimes is, yeah, in a couple of years, in a year or two, we're going to get stuck into this. We're going to go at it. We really will. A few years ago, I used to say to people, hey, what do you anticipate in 5 years' time? Will you be like this? Will you be fully digitized? Will you be? And everybody goes, oh, yeah. The big difference is Sullivan realized that if they leave it 2 years, their competitors are going to have 2 years more data behind them. They're going to have lost out on all the efficiencies that should be gained from 2 years of operating. And they literally decided, and it's the one area where with these platforms like Flowforma, it is the one area where you can dip your toe in the water. You do not have to dive in at the deep end. You can get the one process and go, right, we're going to prove it with this one. The reality is, and we all know it, if we had every process digitized, we'd be way more efficient. So the guys in Sullivan's knew we are going to have consistent data. They knew all this. We're going to have good, solid reporting, but we need to prove it on the first one. Now, again, that was the same as Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. The final example, and again, this is one that's kind of dear to my heart because I dealt with the director of finance here, a guy called Mark Lay, when he arrived in Abington and Whitney. It was only a few months afterwards, and he was beset with paperwork and felt we can do something about this, or we should do something about this. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the sort of workings of colleges, but you got to prove everything. So in advance of dealing with us, what Mark did was he did an analysis of a number of processes. We've 5 of them listed here. There was actually more, but he did analysis of those processes and how long they were taking to be completed on average. He did a study on this for a few months, gathered up all the stats. We then proceeded with Flowforma in Abington in the college, and the processes were created. So he created an analysis then of the before and after. And as you can see here, the results from all of these processes. Now, the interesting thing, if you notice, some of them obviously have way more hours saved than others. But the cumulative effect was for them to save over 5,000 hours in those processes alone. Now, the interesting part, as I say, is that some processes have higher yields than others. And sometimes the ones that you think are going to be more productive are going to yield more. They don't yield as much as another one. So the trips and visits process, they were quite astonished to see the amounts of hours saved. And when you equate that to people, Mark, with the 5,000 hours, he reckoned he saved on 2.5 staff in the organization. But the way he equates it is, he doesn't equate it as saving people. He equates it as he has gained 2.5 people in his workforce because of the extra time that has been saved by doing this, by digitizing. So it's an increase in your workforce without the physical need to have the people there. Now, from an expansion point of view, again, the proof points are there, and Mark is moving along steadily with all of this. But as you can imagine, the argument or the discussion that Mark would have had with the board to invest in something and to put the time into this was proven very quickly and very easily. We, in Flowforma, we literally go from, we have customers New Zealand over to the west coast of the States. And we sit on top of the Office 365 environment. So we basically sit in an area where we've got hundreds of millions of clients using the environment. In our case, we have over 200,000 users of Flowforma, and obviously increasing on a monthly, quarterly basis. The one big thing that Rob was saying earlier on for me was that organizations are expecting, 80% of organizations are expecting that the processes are going to be done internally by people who are, I would presume, non-IT people. The significance of that is that if you can educate, and it shouldn't take long, especially with Flowforma, it's 2 days training, but it shouldn't take long to educate business people on how to assemble their processes. So they have the knowledge, they know the process. What you need to do is give them the environment and the tools to go, okay, you tell us what the process is, i.e. the system, you tell the system what it is, and it produces the environment for you. This is born from qualifying questions, etc., that we would supply to customers. We would ask them, your process, what are the people involved? What are the tasks, touch points, data integration points? All of these questions, when you answer them, it means that the first process is tough to put together, tougher. Second, third, fourth accelerates at a rate of knots. Sorry. So this is just a snapshot of some of our clients across the globe. And again, they all have a consistent need, and the consistent need is to start digitizing. And of the ones there in front of me, there's only a handful that have said from the very start, this is pure strategy. We're going to be digital in, we're going to be fully digital in X amount of time. Only not all of them. Most of them came with a problem and said, we need to do this. And we know that if we fix this, we will then get support to do more. And that's what they got. So they started with one, and then they got more and more and more processes digitized. Some of these are, it's actually jaw-dropping, the level of digitization that they've achieved with Flowforma. And again, it started at the initial point. It was all about solving one need. And as Rob said earlier on, the big focus was not cost reduction, it was efficiency. Now, one thing that they all knew as well is that if they become more efficient, I mean, it sounds completely logical, and it should be, but if you become more efficient, you're going to save money and you're going to save time. But as I say, don't think about it as saving on people. Think about it on gaining, because you get more from your people. And that's where you get employee satisfaction, because they do not spend tons of time doing admin work. They get stuck into their role a lot more. You get more percentage of output from them. Everybody's happier there in that case, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you so
I'll
much
pass
for that,
back.
Shay. Thank you so much. And Rob, I'd like to welcome you back as well for Q&A. That was really informative, guys. It was great to see Forrester's 2022 Digital Process Automation Survey results. Great explanation of all. And Shay, from your end, great to see the proof and the actual figures of what individuals and organizations can save when digitizing. So thank you so much for that. Just checking, Rob, if you can join us back again.
I'm back. I've lost my video, Ursula, but hopefully,
Okay, that's no
hopefully
problem, Rob.
Q&A we just need a voice.
That's no problem at all. That's great. So anyone listening in, if you'd like to add in any additional questions into the Q&A section, that would be great. We'll have a couple of minutes just for the Q&A before we close. But we'll kick off, Rob, with you. Can you explain the importance of the role of a citizen developer?
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I think that's really what this is all coming down to. And I've tried to be a little careful and a little cagey, because I think there's a lot of organizations out there that think we're not ready to turn on this whole concept of the citizen developer. I don't want my claims adjusters, or I don't want my, my nurses, playing around with the admission process and thing. And it's like, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is very carefully bringing the people in my organization that understand my business best. I like to use the term closer to the development process. So Shay actually had some examples where, some of the organizations were just working really closely with stakeholders, and it might have been a developer who is in charge of IT governance and development, working really closely in a fundamentally different way than we've ever worked with before. But I also want to kind of bring up the point that says this concept of the citizen developer, this is going to happen, right? So, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, using a tool like Flowforma to automate a process that is extremely well governed. Flowforma has invested very heavily in governance tools, for example, to make sure that the citizen development process is well governed. That person that's coming into the organization is going to be expected to be able to develop applications that go into a managed platform, and is not going to have a spreadsheet and email as the only tools that they have available to them. We really believe this is coming, but we think we've taken a very, very critical step here, where we've redefined the development process so that employees, citizens, are much more deeply involved. And the data, again, 80% of organizations want this. So, so the need for this is really, really well understood.
Right, thanks, Rob. And Shay, do you want to explain maybe for the audience a little bit about the Flowforma governance tool and that piece of the solution?
Yeah, and I'm glad Rob mentioned it, because it's something that we kind of, you sometimes take these things for granted, because you have a great feature that allows you to give specific individuals sandbox environments, or environments where they can put their ideas together. They see an inefficient process internally and they can create their own process. But then IT can still manage it because it gets promoted to the next level where it can be reviewed and, hooked up with live information to test, and then becomes live. So we have an environment called governance that facilitates the movement of processes from inception all the way through to going live, and then it can actually distribute those processes to different environments. So not every department wants to see a concrete pouring process, so HR don't need to see that. So they don't get to see that. That's not on their portal. So they get to distribute through different portals. So that governance, that's a sort of a simple way of describing governance. But the reality is, and it's great for us, I have to say, is that we seem to be the only ones doing it. And we also get asked about it a lot. So it comes up. It's like, hey, how do I know that someone's going to put in something, especially from IT, they say, how do I know that I can control these people? I don't want silos everywhere. We say, well, we've got governance. So
So
I don't think we'll be on our own for long.
pat on the back from the analyst. Yeah, you guys did this early. You got this. You had a jump on governance before COVID, and COVID was really kind of the cork that came out of the bottle, where everybody said, "Oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? We're going to need governance." So yeah, you guys had a little bit of a little bit of vision there. Thank you for that.
Great, thanks, guys. Shay, maybe this one could be answered by yourself, and you might have kind of answered this in your case study section, but just to reiterate it for our audience, someone is asking, how soon do they expect to see a return on investment when implementing a no-code solution?
It's I'm sure, Rob, you've heard this all the time, and it is the perennial question of, okay, great, well, when am I going to see results? How quick am I going to see results on this? Now, I'm going to try not to be vague, but the reality is there's a few ingredients in this, and some of the biggest ones are how much support and effort the organization is going to put behind it. So I'll give you an example. We would, on average, we would say that if somebody comes in, even though you could technically create a process in, a few hours, right? Technically, you could do that. If I sat in there and I wanted to do a process now, I could have it done in a few hours. I could even have it generating a document. Fantastic. That does not happen on your first process because you get a lot of people involved in the conversation. So a lot of people saying, what about this? What about that? You have to feed off people, and then they can't do it every day. So you don't get feedback for a week. And so some of the organizations we've dealt with who have said, right, we need to get this done, first one up by a certain date, and put in the effort, they can see a return within a few weeks. Within a few weeks, as in when I say return, as soon as you digitize, you're getting a return. And it depends then on the process. We have lots and lots of examples of some of organizations and use cases that have different returns. The returns can be time, effort, and we have a lovely stat from Beaumont Hospital where they saved over 900,000 sheets of paper in a year. That one is close to my heart because the return on that is not only monetary because of the paper, but not just because of the paper, because 250,000 of those sheets of paper were due to go out in the post. So they saved on the postage, but also the fact from a sustainability point of view. I mean, everybody should have a sustainability register on what they have saved per process, because ultimately you're doing that as well. So you're having the benefits are the soft benefits everywhere. That's a very vague, and that's not a figure there. I'm sure people are looking for a timeline, but hey, within a few weeks you're up and running. You can get results straight away. We would always say that you can actually report on that within about 3 months.
So Shay, I would say there is. I love how you're being kind of careful about this. It is difficult to say, but I think that there was again, I keep coming back to COVID because I think COVID was kind of the proving ground. It was like the moment where people who had been invested in low code suddenly really saw the dramatic value. So, if you were setting up applications that were specific to COVID, banks that were setting up new loan programs that were working with government programs, there were employers that were doing tracking programs to see, who had vaccinations, who was coming into the office. When these things were applications where, put the ROI aside and just say, I need to build a relatively sophisticated workflow application, and I've got a timeline of 2 weeks. I think Beaumont was one who did many of these types of things, right? I have almost no time to respond to this. There was no other way. There was no other way. There was absolutely no way you were going to hire a systems integrator and build it in code. It wasn't possible.
No. The process you were thinking of there is a patient transfer. So that process, when people, elderly were moving from homes to the hospital because they'd caught COVID, if they were trying to do that on a legacy system or on COVID would have been, they'd still be programming it.
Couldn't do it.
So, yeah, it's a great example.
We're very good at putting a pencil to paper and saying we would have brought in these skills, we would have brought in these tools, it would have taken us this long, and the number would have been huge, right? And the number in building it in a low code, no code solution is fundamentally different. But I think, if you notice, I tried to avoid the sort of cost ROI conversation in mind and said, this is about agility, this is about adaptability, this is about your business being able to react in real time or in near real time.
Great, thank you so much, guys. That's all for our Q&A section. Before we close out, I would love to let our audience know about an upcoming event that is happening on September 13th in New York. It is a construction-focused breakfast briefing, and we'll be joined by process experts and customers of Flowforma. And if anyone is from the New York area and would like to attend, just want to let you know that you can register yourself on flowforma.com/New York. So very excited for that event coming up next week. And just to close off, I just want to thank our speakers again for today. Thank you, Rob and Shay. And as a couple of next step suggestions, if you'd like to book a live demonstration with a product expert of Flowforma, we'd be more than happy to do so. You can visit our website, fill in a short form there to access your demonstration. And we also have a couple of case studies and handouts as well. You can access them here or on our website. We have a bunch of industry-specific guidelines, timelines as well for automation that might support your organization and your research. And finally, we have a feedback form that will pop up at the end. If you could fill this out, we would really appreciate it. It just helps us prepare for future events and future webinars and ensure we're creating the correct content for our audience. So again, thank you so much, Shay and Rob. It was a pleasure speaking with you both, and I hope to see you again soon.